Haber's life-saving genius. Imagine the world at the dawn of the 20th century. It's a planet teetering on a knife's edge, a place of burgeoning cities and booming populations, all fueled by the fires of the Industrial Revolution. Humanity was multiplying at a rate never before seen, but it was racing towards a catastrophic, invisible wall. That wall was food. More specifically, the lack of it. The world was facing the very real threat of a Malthusian nightmare, a future where population growth would inevitably outstrip food supply, leading to mass starvation on a global scale. The soil, the very foundation of civilization, was getting tired. For centuries, farmers had relied on natural fertilizers, manure, crop rotation, and, more recently, vast deposits of guano from South America and nitrates from Chile. But these were finite resources. Nations were literally going to war over bird droppings. The world's greatest minds knew that unless a new, seemingly infinite source of fertilizer could be found, billions were doomed to starve. The problem was elemental. It was nitrogen. Nitrogen is the essence of life. It's a critical component of amino acids, proteins, and DNA. Our own bodies are about 3% nitrogen. And while it's the most abundant gas in the atmosphere, making up nearly 80% of the air we breathe, it exists in a form that is almost entirely useless to plants. Atmospheric nitrogen consists of two atoms locked together by one of the strongest chemical bonds in nature, the triple bond. It's an incredibly stable, almost inert molecule. Plants can't just pull it from the air. They need it fixed or convert it into a usable form like ammonia. For eons, this process was handled by lightning strikes and specialized soil bacteria, a slow, delicate, and entirely natural cycle. But nature's pace could no longer keep up with humanity's appetite. The challenge then was monumental. Find a way to artificially fix the limitless nitrogen in the air, to essentially create life-giving fertilizer out of thin air. This was the holy grail of chemistry, a problem that had stumped scientists for decades. Enter Fritz Haber. Born in 1868 in what is now Poland, Haber was a man of towering intellect and even greater ambition. A brilliant, assimilated German Jew who later converted to Christianity, he was driven by a fierce patriotism and an unshakable belief in the power of science to serve the German state and solve humanity's problems. He saw the nitrogen problem not just as a scientific puzzle, but as a matter of national security and human progress. He dedicated himself to cracking the code. Working at the University of Karlsruhe, he began experimenting with passing hydrogen and nitrogen gases over various catalysts at extremely high temperatures and pressures. The theory was simple, but the practice was a brutal dance with physics. Too much heat would decompose the very ammonia he was trying to create. Too little, and the reaction wouldn't happen at all. It was a delicate, dangerous balancing act. For years, he and his team toiled. They faced explosions, failures, and the scorn of their peers, many of whom believed that synthesizing ammonia at an industrial scale was a physical impossibility. But Haber was relentless. One year, he finally achieved a breakthrough. In a small tabletop reactor, he demonstrated a continuous flow of ammonia, synthesized directly from the air. He had done it. He had found the Goldilocks conditions, a temperature of around 450 degrees Celsius, pressure 200 times that of the atmosphere, and an inexpensive osmium catalyst. He had pulled bread from the air. But a tabletop experiment is one thing. Feeding the world is another. The challenge of scaling up Haber's high-pressure, high-temperature process was immense. This is where Carl Bosch, a chemical engineer from the industrial giant BASF, entered the picture. Bosch was a master of industrial engineering, and he took Haber's delicate laboratory setup and transformed it into a colossal industrial machine. He developed massive reactors capable of withstanding pressures and temperatures that would have been unimaginable just years before. The process became known as the Haber-Bosch process, and it would change the world forever. The impact was immediate and staggering. The first commercial plant opened in 1913, and suddenly humanity had a virtually limitless supply of synthetic fertilizer. Crop yields exploded. Barren fields became fertile. The looming threat of global famine didn't just recede, it vanished. The Haber-Bosch process is arguably the most important invention of the 20th century. Without it, the world's population could not have grown from 1.6 billion to the nearly 8 billion it is today. It is estimated that the nitrogen in the bodies of nearly half of all humans on Earth, billions of us, originated from a Haber-Bosch reactor. Every time you eat a piece of bread, a vegetable, or a piece of meat from a grain-fed animal, you are consuming the direct result of Fritz Haber's genius. He was hailed as a hero, a modern Prometheus who had stolen fire from the gods, in this case nitrogen from the air, and gifted it to humankind. His name was destined for the Nobel Prize, his legacy seemingly secured as one of the greatest benefactors in all of human history. But a year after his invention went industrial, the world plunged into darkness. And the same process that promised to sustain life would be twisted to serve death on an unprecedented scale.
Block 2. The Weaponization of Science. Fritz Haber had conquered hunger. He had secured his place as a titan of science, a savior of billions yet to be born. His invention was a testament to the power of human ingenuity to overcome the limits of nature. But in the summer of 1914, the world he had sought to feed chose instead to feast on itself. The assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo lit a fuse that snaked across Europe, igniting the cataclysm that would become World War I. For Haber, a man whose identity was inextricably linked with his fierce German nationalism, this was not a tragedy but a call to duty. He famously declared, "In peacetime, a scientist belongs to the world, but in wartime, he belongs to his country." And he would dedicate his formidable intellect to serving Germany with a chilling and absolute devotion. The war immediately exposed a critical vulnerability for the German war machine. The British Royal Navy had established a crushing blockade, cutting Germany off from the vital Chilean nitrates it had long imported. These nitrates were not just essential for fertilizer, they were the primary ingredient for manufacturing explosives like TNT and gunpowder. Without them, Germany's guns would fall silent in a matter of months. The war and the nation would be lost. But then came the first dark twist in Haber's legacy. The mill that was designed to produce fertilizer from the air could, with minor adjustments, produce nitric acid, the precursor to all modern explosives. Haber's life-giving invention was immediately repurposed into an engine of war, churning out the raw materials for the shells that were tearing apart the fields of Europe. He had inadvertently bulletproofed the German war effort, prolonging the conflict and, with it, the suffering. But for Haber, this wasn't enough. The war had bogged down into the brutal static attrition of trench warfare. Millions of men were dying in futile charges across no man's land, mowed down by machine guns and artillery. Haber, ever the problem solver, saw this stalemate as a scientific equation in need of a new radical variable. He believed a decisive weapon could break the deadlock and deliver a swift German victory, saving German lives in the long run. He turned his attention to chemistry's darkest potential, poison gas. He assembled a team of Germany's brightest chemists and established Unit 3 of the War Raw Materials Department, a group dedicated to pioneering chemical warfare. He became the driving force, the intellectual and organizational heart of Germany's poison gas program. He systematically studied hundreds of chemical compounds, searching for the perfect weapon. He settled on chlorine, a common industrial chemical, heavier than air, which meant it would sink into the trenches where soldiers took cover. Its effects were monstrous. Chlorine gas reacts with the water in the lungs to form hydrochloric acid, essentially dissolving a soldier's respiratory system from the inside out. Death was a slow, agonizing process of suffocation. Haber was not a detached administrator. He was hands-on, personally overseeing the development, the weaponization of the gas into pressurized canisters, and the training of special troops to deploy it. He disregarded the Hague Convention of 1907, which forbade the use of poison projectiles, arguing that releasing gas from canisters on the ground wasn't technically firing a projectile. It was a lawyer's argument to justify a moral horror. The moment of truth came on April 22, 1915, during the Second Battle of Ypres in Belgium. As the afternoon sun began to set, German pioneer troops, under Haber's supervision, opened the valves on nearly 6,000 canisters. Some 10 feet high and 4 miles wide, drifted slowly towards the unprepared French and Algerian troops. At first, they thought it was a smokescreen. Then the smell hit them, a pungent mix of pineapple and pepper. And then the burning. The cloud enveloped them and chaos erupted. Soldiers began clutching their throats, their faces turning blue as they desperately gasped for air that would only burn them further. They clawed at the earth, their lungs filling with fluid, drowning on dry land. Thousands fled in terror, abandoning their positions and creating a massive gap in the Allied lines. The attack was a terrifying success. The world was horrified. This was a new kind of war, an invisible, indiscriminate killer that violated every known convention of combat. But the genie was out of the bottle. The Allies quickly condemned the attack, and then, just as quickly, began developing their own chemical weapons in a desperate arms race. Haber's work had opened a Pandora's box, leading to the development of even more horrific gases like phosgene and mustard gas, which would inflict misery on millions by the war's end. Haber, however, saw it as a triumph of science and patriotism. But this triumph came at a devastating personal cost. His wife, Clara Immerwahr, was a brilliant chemist in her own right, and one of the first women in Germany to earn a PhD in chemistry. She was a pacifist and was appalled by her husband's work, viewing it as, the night Haber returned from Ypres to celebrate his success, they had a furious argument. Later that night, Clara took his army pistol, walked out into their garden, and shot herself in the chest. In a final chilling testament to his fanatical dedication, Fritz Haber reportedly left the very next morning for the Eastern Front to oversee another gas attack. He had saved the world from starvation, only to invent a new way for it to die in agony, sacrificing his own family on the altar of his nation.
Block 3. Legacy, Ethics, and Paradox. How does history judge a man like Fritz Haber? How can we hold two colossal, contradictory truths in our minds at once? The man who fed billions and the man who pioneered a new form of mass death. This is the central, agonizing paradox of his life, a conflict that came into sharp focus just as the guns of World War I fell silent. In 1918, as the world was still reeling from the horrors of the trenches and the lingering stench of chlorine gas, Fritz Haber was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. The award was not for his work in chemical warfare, of course, but for his pre-war synthesis of ammonia. Yet the timing was, to put it mildly, incendiary.
The announcement was met with international outrage. French and British scientists boycotted the ceremony. Allied newspapers decried the decision to honor a man they considered a war criminal, a man whose triumph at Ypres had brought immeasurable suffering, forced the world to confront an uncomfortable question. Can you separate the science from the scientist? Can you celebrate a discovery while condemning its creator? The committee defended its choice by focusing solely on the monumental, life-giving benefits of the Haber-Bosch process. They argued that the prize was for a specific achievement, a gift to humanity that would echo through the ages long after the war was forgotten. But for many, the honor was irrevocably stained. Haber's Nobel Prize remains one of the most controversial in the institution's history, a permanent symbol of the moral complexities that shadow scientific progress. It crystallizes the debate that continues to this day. What is the true responsibility of a scientist? Is knowledge a neutral tool to be used for good or ill by others? Or does the creator bear responsibility for the consequences of their creation? Haber himself never expressed remorse for his wartime activities. He saw his actions as a patriotic duty, a necessary evil to protect his beloved Germany. He believed he was saving lives by shortening the war, a tragically flawed calculation that instead opened a new dimension of horror. His life after the war was a series of further ironies. He continued his scientific work, even embarking on a quixotic quest to extract gold from seawater to help pay Germany's crippling war reparations, a noble effort that ultimately failed. But the deepest, most tragic irony was yet to come. Haber was a proud German who had converted from Judaism to Christianity and had given his all for the fatherland. Yet his identity was not his to define. When the Nazi Party rose to power in 1933, their anti-Semitic laws targeted all those of Jewish descent, regardless of their faith or their service to the nation. Haber was ordered to dismiss all Jewish scientists from his prestigious institute. He refused, writing in his resignation letter that his traditions demanded he select his collaborators based on their intelligence and character, not their ancestry. He was forced into exile, a man without a country, rejected by. He died of a heart attack a year later, a broken man. The final, horrifying postscript to his life story is perhaps the most chilling of all. One of the products developed at his institute was a cyanide-based pesticide called Zyklone. After his death, a new formulation, Zyklone B, would be used by the Nazis as the instrument of mass murder in the gas chambers of Auschwitz and other death camps, killing millions, including some of Haber's own relatives. The science he had pioneered to create weapons for the battlefield had, in the hands of a monstrous regime, been perverted into a tool for industrial genocide. So, what is the final verdict on Fritz Haber? There isn't one. His legacy is a permanent, unsettling duality. On one hand, the Haber-Bosch process remains a foundational pillar of modern civilization. The food on our tables, the stability of our global population is owed in large part to his breakthrough. He is, by the numbers, one of the greatest saviors in human history. On the other hand, he willingly and enthusiastically unleashed a new form of warfare that caused unimaginable agony and set a terrifying precedent. His work stands as a stark and eternal warning about the potential for human genius to be co-opted by nationalism, ideology, and the brutal calculus of war. Fritz Haber's story is not one of a simple hero or a simple villain. It is the story of us, of our species' incredible capacity for creation, and our equally terrifying capacity for destruction, often embodied in the very same mind. One man's genius gave us both the bread we eat and the poison we fear, a legacy written in nitrogen and in blood.